I did. And today, this workshop is based on emotions. We're going to speak all about emotions, right? As I told you, nowadays, it is very much, it's a lot more common to actually speak about mental health and about emotions. And that's very healthy. That's a good thing. But when I was growing up, that was not a common thing, or going to a therapist is not something that was commonly seen, right? But this workshop is based on emotions. And what I want you to have at hand is that paper that we passed out, right? That a pen, maybe, and most importantly, as I said before, to be fully present in this place, to be here, right? I think that's one of the hardest things for us because we're always thinking what's coming next. We're always thinking about what's going on at home, what's the person next to me doing, right? But as much as you can, I want you to drive back your attention into where we are. And so the idea of this workshop, and this is actually the first time that I give it in English. I usually do it in Spanish, but this is a good challenge for me. But the idea of this workshop, and the reason and why I created it, was so that we can connect to our emotions, and so that we can connect to ourselves. So this workshop is divided into 4 parts. The first one is called Learning to Love Myself. Learning to love myself. The second one is Dating Myself. It's a little bit, a lot actually, like Pastor Lori was speaking about yesterday. We're on the same tune, right? Learning to love myself. The second thing is dating myself. Third thing is understanding my emotions. And the fourth thing is, what do I do with my emotions? So the first thing I want you to write down is, how do you feel today? If you were to pinpoint how you feel today, an emotion that describes how you are today, I want you to write it down in this moment. I don't know if somebody wants to share. I don't want to point out at anyone, but maybe somebody wants to share how they're doing today, how they're feeling today. Yes. Relaxed and happy. Nice. Anxious because you don't speak Spanish. I'm here for you. Anxious because you don't speak. Anybody else wants to share? Yes. Excited and thankful. That's beautiful. Anyone else? So we're going to jump into the first section of the workshop, right? So learning to love myself. So understanding how we feel and understanding our emotions is part of loving ourselves. There's no one in this world that should be more interested in knowing how you feel more than yourself. You're the first person that can ask yourself, how am I doing today? How did I wake up today? What's going on inside of me? To be able to know myself, right? I need to know how I feel. I need to know what's going on in my inside world. To be able to understand our identity, we need to know our essence. We need to know what our preferences are. We need to know how we deal with emotions, how we manage our emotions. And we also need to learn what are the triggers towards those emotions. Because it is impossible to love someone that you don't know. So the first step is to explore yourself, to go into that journey of exploring your inner world. And, your emotions, they're not your identity, but they tell you a lot about what's going on with you. They have relevant information of your inner world. And what the thing is that when you learn to know how you feel, what happens is that you know how to meet your needs. You know what is it that you need in that moment. Maybe someone here came and they didn't raise their hands because maybe they were sad, or they were feeling anxious. When you go into this journey of exploring yourself, you know how to meet your needs. You can say, today I'm not feeling quite there yet. So maybe I'm going to give myself some space to process what's going on inside of me. Every time we explore our emotions and every time we go into this inner world, what happens is that you learn how to express yourself more correctly. You understand your emotions, you're able to validate your experiences, and you're the first one who says, it's going to be all right, because you become a safe refuge for yourself. You become a safe haven for yourself. We need to learn how to do these things. And you know what the thing is that this process requires of a special ingredient, right? This inner journey or this exploration of your emotions, and it requires an essential ingredient, and that's compassion. Because the way that you're going to go about exploring yourself is with compassion, not from a place of a judge. Because many times what we do is that when we ask ourselves how we're doing and we say we're angry, right? What we do is that we place ourselves in the seat of the judge and we say, why am I angry? Have you ever felt like that? And anger is that type of emotion that kind of reproduces itself. I'm angry, and then I'm angry because I'm angry and I don't know how to get out of this anger. Has that happened to you, right? So it is important that we go into this journey with this mindset of a person who's observing, but not from a person who's judging, from a non-judgmental perspective. So someone who's observing might say something like, oh, look, that's blue. Oh, look, today, for some reason, I'm feeling anxious. But you're not judging that emotion. What you're doing is just exploring and seeing it. So in order to do that, I'm going to name 3 postures that we're going to avoid with emotions, right? Sitting from this observer perspective, what we're going to do is that we're going to avoid the posture of being complacent. Complacent means, I'm sad, but you know what? I'm going to go shopping so I can get rid of this sadness, right? Don't we all do that? Let me go into online shopping. Let me go into Amazon, right? So we're going to avoid that posture of being complacent. Instead of saying, I'm going to just, I feel sad, so I'm just going to do this to get rid of the sadness. I'm going to ask myself, why am I sad? Is there something? Is there a reason why I'm sad? Right? So we're going to avoid this posture of being complacent. The second one is going to be, we're going to avoid the posture of disapproving. And we all have done that, right? Oh my God, I'm so dramatic. Why am I sad about this situation, right? Have you ever done that? I have. I have disapproved of what I feel, but you're also going to avoid the posture of dwelling into your emotions. We all know people who decide to stay and kind of in Spanish you say empalagar. You fill yourself up with the emotion and then you feel sad and you put sad music, right? You guys laugh because you've been there, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to avoid these 3 types of postures, because when we take this position of a judge and when we're complacent, when we become disapproving, and also when we dwell on those emotions, we become a place that is not safe for us to express what we're going through. We become that place of, we start nagging because we feel the way that we feel, and it is impossible to get out of those waves, because emotions are waves, right? They come, you can experience them, they're uncomfortable, but then they go. Now, if you decide to avoid that wave, then it becomes really difficult to be able to manage that emotion, to be able to understand it for that next time when it comes, because it will come again, you won't understand what to do. I'm sure you've heard the idea of that we all have an inner child, right? And that as adults, we are responsible to take care of that inner child. Many of us, maybe we grew up in households where emotions was not something that we would talk about. And many of us come from those types of households, right? When it's why are you crying? You shouldn't be crying. No, the child lost the candies, and that's why he's crying, and that's valid for him to cry about the missing candies, right? And this is not to criticize our parents or to criticize your mom or your dad or my mom or my dad, but it's just to understand where we come from, right? But when we grow up and we become adults, we are the ones who are responsible to be able to explore, validate, and navigate through our emotions, right? So when you become the caregiver for this inner child, then everything seems very different, because you're able to tell yourself, I'm here for you. I understand what you're going through. And from that place of compassion, it's very different to approach emotions. No one teaches us to deal with emotions, to manage our emotions. Nobody teaches us that. In school, there is no classroom, and I don't know if nowadays there is, but when I went to school, there wasn't any classroom that was emotion 101. No, right? Nobody teaches us that, and especially in the Latin American culture, and emotion is not something that you quite talk about. Actually, there are many stigmas around emotions, such as men don't cry. But you know what? Jesus cried. You know, another thing that we do and that we learn in Latin America is that women are sensitive. Oh my God, you feel too much. Why do you feel too much? And we all grew up with these misconceptions about emotions, and we all grew up thinking that when somebody talks about their emotions too much, it's because they're too sensitive. You need to get out of there, right? But yes, we can learn how to manage our emotions once we understand it. And once we get rid of all of those misconceptions that we grew up with. So maybe this is a time that you can take to just think about and observe, right? You're not judging, you're observing. How did I grow up? Did we ever talk in the table with our parents about emotions, about how I felt, about how did I manage to conquer the situation, about how I felt about a particular situation? You know, nowadays a lot of people speak about emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence is not to feel. It's to understand, regulate, process, validate your emotion. That's what it means. And personally, that is emotionally intelligent is not someone that doesn't feel. Because the goal is never to try to control your emotions. The goal is to not allow those emotions to control you, but not for you to control that. We all go through different waves at time. You know, I don't know what they've told you. I don't know how you grew up. I don't know the childhood that you had and the context in which you lived, but we all go through different emotions, and the likelihood that someone has gone through the situation that you're going through right now or through the emotion that you have right now is very high. The thing is that we are not always vulnerable to speak out about them. Right? So the goal is to be in tune with your emotions, to understand your emotions, and to learn how much the emotions impact the relationships that you have around you, and to become less reactive, right? Because we don't talk about how we feel, because I don't tell you, hey, you know, what happened yesterday, this is the way that it made me feel. I'm not saying that that was your intention. I'm not saying that you wanted to hurt me, but this is how I felt. Maybe just based on my background, right? Because we don't have these sorts of conversations, what happens is that I come and I'm like, right? And we learn to avoid having the conversations, and we become reactive. And she doesn't understand what's going on. She doesn't understand my past. She doesn't understand the button that she pressed when she said what she said, right? But if we learn to have these sort of conversations when we're open, when we're vulnerable, and when in a good way we express what's going on within us, once we have had our time with God and say, this is what's going on, and I am no fragile, I'm not sensitive because I'm going through this experience, I can share with someone else my experience, and that's going to make me a less reactive person and a more proactive person, because you're going to see yourself having conversations that matter and that make you grow and that make the relationship grow. Because once she knows that there's something that she said that just triggered me, she might say, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't even my intention, I'm so sorry. And then there's this reconciliation, right? So when you are in this process of learning to love yourself, it is very crucial that you learn how to express those emotions. But the first thing is what do I feel? What's going on inside me? Why is it that what this person said, it triggered me in such a way that just created a chaos inside of me? And so now we move to the second part, which is, I call it dating myself. But basically the idea is for you to take some time. And I know that when I say this, many people are like, oh my God, this takes so much time. Like, really, do I have to sit with myself and date myself and just ask myself how I'm doing? Like, I don't have time for that, you know? But you know what I say? Oh, really, you don't have time for that? Do you have time to later repair relationships because you just reacted to what the person says? Maybe we can take some time, and at the beginning, it might not come from an organic place. Maybe it might feel a little bit forced. But the idea is for you to sit with yourself, maybe in the morning while you're drinking your coffee, while you're reading your Bible, or at night, whenever you do that, right? During the day, and ask yourself, like, how am I doing? And I wrote down certain questions that you can ask yourself, such as, how did I wake up today? How am I doing today? How do you feel? You know, generally, we ask these questions to someone else, but it's not common to ask ourselves. And again, at the beginning, it might sound like it's something, you know, this whole ritual where I have to ask myself. No, but then it becomes kind of part of your nature. Nowadays, when I wake up, I'm like, what challenges do I have ahead? Like, how do they make me feel? Like, what is it that's going on with? And then I start to notice, because in psychology, you study that once you recognize an emotion, automatically the severity of what you're feeling goes down. Just by recognizing, just by being able to pinpoint at an emotion, it automatically goes down. And there's something that my husband and I, we call it a button panel. That's what we call it, a button panel, right? We all have one. You don't know it, but you have a button panel in your heart. What is that button panel about? Maybe someone said something, and they did not mean it at all. But to you, it brought up a memory of something that someone had said to you in the past, or a lie that you've believed in your head for such a long time. And your panel is just going on fire, right? It's just an alert mode. And there are people in our lives that have this ability to kind of press on all of our buttons. Have you been pressed on all of your buttons? That you're like, you are just going all over the place on my panel right now, you know? But then when you date yourself, you have this talk and you're like, so what button did she press? What was that button? Oh, maybe that button is called trauma. Maybe I just feel offended because what she said was this, but what I understood was this. And all of this can happen when we have a date with us. One of the things that I want you to understand is that our emotions fluctuate all the time. You wake up feeling one way, and during the day, you can be with me that we start to just go through different emotions and this and that. Emotions are not a fixated thing, but in the moment, we feel like they are. When we're angry and we can't contain that, or when we're anxious, automatically we feel that that's going to last forever, but that's a lie. It's going to pass if you're able to identify it, if you're able to validate it. And I want you to pay attention to this, because validating the emotion is not saying that you're right about feeling that, right? Validating the emotion is saying it's okay to feel this way. It's so funny because my mom, a couple of months ago, she was upset at me at something. And when she came to talk to me, she said, Marcela, my psychologist says that I am right about how I feel. And I said, no, Mom, that's not what your psychologist said. Your psychologist said that it's okay to feel the way that you feel, but they did not say that they're right, because if not, they'll be doing a bad job, right? They're not saying that you're right. They say that it's valid for you to feel the way that you feel. So that's what you're going to do with your emotions. You're going to say, it is valid for me to feel this way. It's not that I'm right or wrong. It's just valid. It's okay to feel the way that I feel. Now, what am I going to do with that? Now, when you understand and you're in that tune with your inner voice, and you're constantly asking yourself, and you're present with who you are and what you feel and what's going on around you, you just become a much healthier, emotional person. And, I know that it sounds like a lot, but my invitation to you is start wherever you want from whatever we talk about today. If there's one thing that you remember, start there. If what you will remember is to say, I need to validate my emotions, great, that's a great start. One time I was speaking to someone and they were saying, I just came to church and the Bible is just so complex, like I can't understand it. There's so many verses. Where do I start? What do I do? And I heard a pastor say, they said, you don't need to know the Bible by memory, but whatever verse you understand and you actually remember, practice that one. And that's going to be good for you. So if there's one thing that you remember from everything that we speak about today, practice that one thing. Start there. This is not a right or wrong. This is not a step 1, 2, 3. I just arranged it just for the matter of doing this workshop. But in reality, if there's one thing that you remember, practice that with your emotions. And I assure you that you will grow emotionally, that you will grow in the understanding of yourself. The way that you are going to deal with your emotions and the way that you're going to manage your emotions is going to affect every area of your life, because we're emotional beings, right? So everything is going to be affected by it. Your relationships, yourself, the way that you make decisions, your health, your perspective on life, your perspective on God. Jesus got angry. Jesus was sad. He did not sin. What does that mean? That he did not react to that emotion, but he felt it. He went through it because he had emotions just like you and I do. And then we go to this third part, which is knowing your emotions. You are not your emotions. Your identity doesn't come from that. You're not what you feel. You're not what you think. You're not even what you do. But our emotions tell us a lot of signals about what's going on inside of you. And I told you before this that the goal is never to control our emotions, because the more that we try to control, the less that we can, and the more that we feel overwhelmed by them. The idea is for the emotion not to control yourself. So I'll share with you something that I feel. When I go into a trip, and I love traveling, and I get to travel a lot, but every time I jump into an airplane, when there's turbulence, I feel anxious. I feel very anxious. And so what I've learned is that my goal is not to control that anxiety, but instead for that anxiety not to control me. What does that mean? It means that I will not allow that anxiety to stop me from traveling and discovering places and meeting new people. So what I will learn is to manage around that anxiety, take some resources, right? Have a toolbox of things that I know help me out in those moments, but I will not allow that anxiety to control my life. I will not stop going places because the anxiety is there. So what I do is that I observe it and I'm like, oh, you're there. Oh, that's where you are. You're there. Okay, so now I'm going to take out my toolbox and I'm going to start doing things so that I can be present in the moment and I can start regulating that emotion. Don't allow your emotions to control you. So there are a couple of things that I'm going to tell you about emotions very quick. There are primary emotions and there are secondary emotions. I have placed I don't know how you say it, una rueda, right? In the second page, I've placed it's right there. Yeah, in the manual, but this is called a diagram, a wheel, exactly, an emotional wheel, right? So generally what happens is that when somebody asks you how you feel, you know what you respond? You respond with your secondary emotions, because those are the ones that we know the most. The basic ones are sadness, fear, shame, angry, joy. So many of you said, today I feel happy, and that's generally what we say. Nobody goes around and says, today I feel insufficient, right? But the more that you're able to pinpoint, right, and the more specific that you are, the more that you can target that emotion. So I've put that wheel there, so maybe in one day that you have the time and you're dating yourself, you kind of look at the wheel and you're like, this person said this, and this is how I felt. What we usually say is, you made me feel this. But when we do that, we're not owning our emotions. The emotion is yours. Because if she made me feel this, there's nothing that I can do. But if I felt this, then there's a lot that I can do, and there's a lot of work that I can go into. I own my emotions. They're mine, right? So the idea is for you to learn what are the primary, secondary emotions, and when you go into the primary emotions, right, because you see anger, right? And anger it's like an iceberg, like the tip of the iceberg, but underneath it, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of uncomfortable emotions, right? So the idea is for you to pinpoint at them. And this goes towards the second thing that I want to tell you. Generally, we say that when we feel sad or when we feel angry, those are bad emotions. There's no such thing as bad emotions. There are uncomfortable emotions and ones that are more comfortable. But when we automatically classify sadness or anger or anxiety as a bad one, right, then I'm just feeling bad today, right? No, maybe you're feeling sad. It's just uncomfortable, but they're not bad. The third thing that I want to tell you, and what changes the attitude towards the emotion changes when you don't classify them as bad, but instead you say, it's just uncomfortable, right? I wish I didn't feel this right now, but this is what I feel right now. The third thing is that there is a power that is called the power of end. We generally think that we must feel one thing at a time. But many of us feel a lot of things at once. For example, a mom. Just a couple of weeks ago, my friend just had a baby, a newborn. And she tells me, I am extremely happy, but at the same time, I am extremely sleep deprived and angry at some moments. It's like I feel so many things at once. And the first thing I told her is, you don't have to choose. You can feel this and you can feel this. And actually, we speak about this all the time. We speak that joy is something that comes from within. Even if you're sad, you can feel joyful. So in a day, when you're asking yourself this question, you might answer 2 things, and that's okay. You might answer 3. The power of end. You can feel sad and happy at the same time. You're not crazy for feeling that way. you're actually able to, in the middle of that sadness, you're being able to identify things that actually bring you joy and that you're actually thankful for. You know how healthy that is? You know how healthy that is. And the fourth thing is we're going to speak about cycles, right? And we're still speaking about the third part of this workshop, which is learn to know your emotions, right? There is a cycle between your emotions. There's a connection between an emotion, a thought, an action, and a memory. I just want you to know that there's a connection between all of those things. When you understand that and you say, this is how I'm thinking about myself. This is how I'm thinking about myself because this is what I'm feeling. And this is what I'm feeling because this is what I'm thinking. And so I'm acting this way. There's a connection between those things. And it is important to understand that connection because many times the way that we feel refers back to an experience that we had. Actually, Pastor Laurie was speaking a lot about this yesterday. And it is exactly that. You know that one time, and I've asked my client to be able to speak about this, and they've given me the permission. And I had a client that the wife would say things such as, hey, can you pick up your dirty clothing, right? And every time she would say that, it was kind of like he would go into this chaos of emotions, right? And we started to investigate it, and it's funny because I think that we've all been there, right? That we tell our husbands, hey, pick up after your clothes, right? And it's something casual. Okay, let me pick it up and let me just put it away. But to this person, he grew up in a household where his parents would constantly tell him that he was doing it wrong, that the things that he did were wrong. And so every time she would say that, he would go into this whole chaos because to him, what they were telling him is, you are wrong. Like, you're doing it wrong. You cannot do one thing right. When you understand that connections between emotions, between feelings, between actions, and between your memories, you're able to identify those things and see, oh, this is why I'm reacting the way that I'm reacting. How am I doing with time? Great? Okay. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you. And the last part, we're going to this last part. So what do I do with them? All of the emotions, they have a purpose. And the more that you try to resist them, the more they persist. The more you resist, the more they persist. But if you go into that wave, knowing, oh my God, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to be here. I know I'm angry, and I don't want to be angry. Because it's funny, a couple of weeks ago, I have a therapist. I am a pastor, I am a therapist, and I go to therapy because it's good for me, because it's good for me to speak to someone. And when I go to my therapist, I sat there and I'm like, I feel angry and I don't want to feel angry. I feel sad and I don't want to feel sad. And she's like, Marcela, have you noticed that during the last couple of weeks, you've said, I feel jealous and I don't want to feel jealous. I feel angry and I don't feel angry. It sounds like you don't want to be human. It sounds like you don't want to feel, right? So all of emotions tell us things about ourselves, tell us things of what's going on. So the important part is for you to understand that all emotions have information within them. But when you understand to connect with that, when you understand to connect with what you're going through, you're able to understand a lot about your experiences. Express yourself if that's necessary. Maybe you need to speak to someone. Maybe you need to speak to God. Maybe you need to do some journaling. Maybe after that date that you have with yourself, you're like, you know what? This is overwhelming. I need to speak to somebody else about this. And that's the right decision to make. Then you can learn to regulate them. And then you create. What is it that you create? A new narrative on what your life is and what your emotions mean. That's when you learn to regulate them. It's not about avoiding it. It's not about reframing to feel. You know, nowadays, we are so impacted with so much information. Like, you can look into Google everything, basically. But the thing is, one thing is to know the information, and another thing is to make use of it. So that's why I encourage you today to actually look at this information and start somewhere. Start applying one thing. And I assure you that the way that you face emotions is going to be very different. So I told you at one moment that we are not what we feel, that we are not what we think, and that we are not what we do. So what are we? We are free. We are daughters, beloved daughters of God, and we are free. We are free from our emotions. We are free from what we do. And we are free from what we think. So if we learn to approach those things and say, this is not who I am, this is how I feel, but this is not who I am, then you're able to change that. And my prayer for you is that you're in such a tune with who you are, in such a tune with how you feel, and the integration between your thoughts, your actions, and your emotions, that you just become a healthier person. That when people are around you, they know that if something's going on with you, you'll be able to tell them. Because once you go in this haven with yourself, with Jesus, and you manage everything that has going on with you, you can go out into the world and speak to people, not react to them, but instead to treat them with the same compassion that you treat yourself. So if you allow me to pray for you, I would love to do that. Thank you, God, because you are in this constant journey of encouraging us to become the best version of who we are. I ask you, God, that we are responsible beings that are able to identify all of the things that we go through so that we can become better people to the people around us. God, we want to make a pact today with you that we will be responsible with what's going on inside of us. First, so that we can love us the way that you love us, so that later we can become people who love, people who encourage, people who are compassionate with others. I thank you for all the women that are here today, and I ask you, God, that you bring peace into their hearts, into their minds, into their soul, into everything that they are. I pray to you in the name of Jesus. Amen and amen.
So we're going to have 5 minutes. If you have any questions for Marcela today, you can ask, or any comments that you want to add. Right there.
Hi, Marcela. My name is Rachel, and my question for you is, do you have any tips for obsessive thoughts and overthinking and ruminating when you're just sitting there going over the same thoughts?
Yeah. You know, so I'm going to go back into the not resisting them, right? But there comes a moment when you realize that maybe on your own, obviously the Bible says that we need to take every thought captive to him, right? But sometimes we try to do that and we seem to, oh, I can't. Like I go back into the same thing. So every time you go back into a same situation, one time somebody asked me, when is the right time to seek help? Once you go back to the situation one and again and again and again, you can't seem to get out of there. Maybe instead of resisting that and seeing something as something bad, try to ask, what is it trying to teach me? Like, what is it trying to say, right? Sometimes it's just this obsessiveness that we have, but maybe the first place to start is, what is there? What is that thought? You know, what is it trying to tell me? Is it an alarm that's maybe there to protect me? Because generally, sometimes when we experience anxiety or an emotion that is uncomfortable, we try to step away from it. Like, this is here to hurt me. But sometimes when we just befriend that anxiety and say, okay, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to protect me from, right? So maybe investigating and exploring a little bit more that obsessive thought. But if you have done that already, then maybe that's a cue for you to seek help. Because when we all try to get out of those places, right? But when we feel like it's too much, this is too much to handle, I'm overwhelmed by it, then that's a time so that you can go to speak to a counselor, to your pastor, to a leader, to a therapist, right? That might be able to show you something that you're not seeing from that pattern, right? Because the idea is to break that pattern, right, of thinking, right? So, yeah.